Unaware his pregnant ex-wife is now married to a billionaire, Richard Blackwell had splashed mud water on her while his mistress laughed 10 years ago. And now, lying in a hospital bed at 53 years old with stage 4 cancer and only weeks to live, the shock of what happened next wasn't about him anymore. 16-year-old James Sterling, the heir to a $20 billion empire and the boy Richard mocked before he was born, had just discovered the viral video that destroyed his biological father figure's life. And the question tearing through James's mind as he stared at footage of his mother covered in muddy water wasn't about revenge. It was about whether the broken man dying alone in that hospital deserved mercy from the son of the woman he destroyed. But what nobody expected was this. When James showed up at Richard's hospital room unannounced, without telling his mother Emma or his father Alexander, what the 16-year-old said to the man who'd called his mother barren and worthless didn't just shock Richard in his final days. It revealed a truth about forgiveness and legacy and breaking cycles that neither Richard nor Emma ever understood. And when Emma finally learned that her son had visited Richard without her knowledge, when she discovered what James said and what Richard's response was before he died, the decision she made about attending Richard's funeral would leave everyone who'd followed this story speechless. But here's what will break your heart. What did 16-year-old James see in that viral video that made him realize his perfect life was built on his mother's suffering? What did Richard say to James in that hospital room that finally gave the dying man something he'd never had? Not forgiveness, but peace. And when Richard Blackwell took his last breath 3 weeks later, why did the contents of his will shock everyone, including the family he'd destroyed a decade earlier? Stay with me, because Part 4 will prove that some stories don't end with revenge or redemption. They end with the next generation choosing to break the cycles that destroyed the one before them. 10 years had passed since Richard tried to apologize in that park, and he'd spent every single one of those years believing Emma's children would never know his name. Richard was 53 now, living in the same one-bedroom flat in Croydon, still working as a property consultant, still sober, still alone. But 3 months ago, he'd started feeling tired all the time. Then came the cough that wouldn't stop. Then the blood. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Stage 4 lung cancer. Metastasized, inoperable. 6 months at most, the doctor said, probably less. Richard took the news the way he'd taken everything else in the last decade, with quiet acceptance. This was how his story ended. No wife, no children, no legacy. Just a hospital bed in a public ward and a nurse who checked on him twice a day. He'd written his will weeks ago, left everything, his small savings about $30,000 to the Children's Literacy Foundation Emma had started. Anonymous donation. She'd never know it came from him. Richard spent his days staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways he'd wasted his life. The business he'd built and lost, the woman he'd destroyed, the family that could have been his. He had no visitors. His mother was dead. His friends had abandoned him years ago. Even his therapist had retired. Richard Blackwell was dying exactly the way he'd lived the last decade, completely alone. But 16-year-old James Sterling had no idea about any of this. James was in his bedroom at the Sterling family estate, supposed to be doing homework, but instead scrolling through social media on his phone. He was tall like his father Alexander, with his mother Emma's green eyes and kind smile. He went to the best private school in London, played on the football team, had friends who came from old money and new wealth. His life was perfect, blessed, easy, until he clicked on a video that a classmate had shared in their group chat. "Dude, is this your mum?" the message said. James frowned and clicked the link. The video was titled, "Billionaire Splashes Mud on Pregnant Woman, Instant Karma." It had 47 million views. James watched, his stomach slowly turning to ice, as a black Bentley drove through a puddle and absolutely soaked a pregnant woman standing on a London street. The woman was crying, her hands protectively on her belly, muddy water dripping down her face. Then the camera zoomed in. James's breath stopped. That was his mother. 10 years younger, but unmistakably Emma Sterling. And she was pregnant. With him. The Bentley window rolled down, and a man leaned out, laughing. Still shopping at Tesco. Still living that budget life. The voice was cruel, mocking, designed to hurt. Then a woman's voice from the passenger seat cackling, "Richard, you're terrible!" James felt sick. He watched as the man, Richard, said words that made James's hands shake. "Some desperate fool actually knocked up my barren ex-wife. We both know your useless body can't carry a child. You'll kill this one too." James paused the video. Read the comments. Read the articles linked below. Property CEO Richard Blackwell humiliates Prime Minister's daughter-in-law. Emma Sterling's ex-husband publicly mocks her pregnancy. The man who splashed mud on a billionaire's wife lost everything. James sat in his room for 2 hours, reading everything, learning about his mother's first marriage, about a baby named Sophie who died, about Richard calling Emma barren, about the divorce, about how Emma met Alexander, about how the Sterling family destroyed Richard's business in retaliation. His entire life, James had known his mother as strong, confident, beloved. He'd never seen her as broken, never imagined her standing on a street covered in mud, crying, being mocked for carrying him. The video had been taken 10 years ago. James was 10 years old, which meant this happened right before he was born. His perfect life, the estate, the privilege, the Sterling name, was built on his mother's survival of this moment. James looked up Richard Blackwell, found recent articles. Former CEO Richard Blackwell diagnosed with terminal cancer. No family, no visitors. The article was from 2 weeks ago. James stared at his phone, his mind racing. This man had hurt his mother in ways James couldn't fully comprehend, had mocked her, had called her barren, had tried to humiliate her while she was pregnant with James. But this man was also dying, alone. And some part of James, the part his mother had raised to be kind even when it was hard, wondered if Richard Blackwell deserved to die completely abandoned. James didn't tell his parents, didn't tell his siblings. He just looked up which hospital Richard was in, told his driver he needed to go to the library, and gave different instructions. 30 minutes later, James Sterling stood outside room 347 in a public hospital ward, staring at a name card that read, Richard Blackwell. His hand shook as he knocked. The voice that answered was weak, raspy, nothing like the cruel laugh from the video. "Come in." James pushed open the door. The room smelled like disinfectant and something else, something dying. Richard Blackwell lay in the bed, and James almost didn't recognize him from the video. The man in the Bentley had been confident, well-dressed, powerful. This man was skeletal, pale, his cheeks sunken, his eyes hollow. An oxygen tube ran under his nose. Richard looked at James with confusion at first, then his eyes widened with recognition, not of James specifically, but of the features. Emma's eyes, the Sterling height. "You're," Richard's voice cracked. "You're James." James stood frozen in the doorway, suddenly unsure why he'd come. "How do you know who I am?" "I've seen your pictures, in magazines, on the news. You look like your mother." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "God, you look so much like her." James stepped into the room, closed the door behind him. "I saw the video, the one from 10 years ago." Richard's face crumbled. He looked away toward the window, unable to meet James's eyes. "Then you know what kind of man I am." "I know what kind of man you were," James said quietly. He pulled a chair up beside the bed, sat down. "I don't know what kind of man you are now." Richard laughed bitterly, which turned into a coughing fit. When he caught his breath, he said, "Does your mother know you're here?" "No." "Your father?" "No." Richard closed his eyes. "They wouldn't want you here. I don't deserve—" "I'm not here because you deserve it," James interrupted. His voice was calm, measured, but underneath was something harder. "I'm here because I need to understand something." Richard opened his eyes, looked at this 16-year-old boy, this child he'd mocked before he was born, and waited. "Why did you do it?" James asked. "Why did you treat my mother that way?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because I was broken. Because I hated myself and took it out on the only person who ever really loved me. Because I measured people's worth by what they could give me instead of who they were." He paused, struggling with each breath. "Your mother couldn't have children, or so the doctors said after we lost our first baby. I blamed her, called her barren, made her believe she was worthless, and when she finally left me, when she chose herself over my cruelty, I couldn't stand it. So when I saw her pregnant 10 years ago, it destroyed every lie I'd told myself. She wasn't broken. I was." James listened, his jaw tight. "You called her barren while she was pregnant with me." "I know. You said she'd kill me, that her body was useless." "I know." Richard's tears were flowing freely now. "And I've spent every day of the last 10 years wishing I could take it back, wishing I could tell her I'm sorry, wishing I could—" "She doesn't think about you," James said, and his voice was hard now. "I asked my dad once about my mom's first marriage. He said it was a dark time she moved past, that she's happy now, that the past doesn't matter. Richard nodded slowly. Good. That's how it should be. But I think about it now, James continued, his voice shaking slightly. I think about my mom standing in that street, covered in mud, 5 months pregnant with me, being told she'd kill me. I think about how scared she must have been, how hurt, how humiliated. Richard couldn't speak, could barely breathe. And I think about you, James said, looking directly at Richard, dying here alone, no family, no one who cares. And I wonder if that's justice or just sad. It's what I deserve, Richard whispered. James shook his head. I don't know if anyone deserves to die alone, even people who've done terrible things. He leaned forward. My mom taught me something. She said hurt people, and healed people heal people. She said the cycle only stops when someone chooses to break it. Richard stared at this 16-year-old with wonder. Your mother raised you well. She raised me to be kind even when it's hard, to see people as more than their worst moment, to understand that everyone's fighting battles we can't see. James paused. She didn't teach me that for you. She taught me that for me, so I don't become someone like you were. The words hit Richard like a physical blow, but they were true. I can't forgive you, James said clearly. That's not mine to give. Only my mom can forgive you, and she doesn't owe you that. But I can give you something else. What? Richard's voice was barely audible. I can tell you that the baby you said she'd kill, he's alive. He's 16. He goes to a good school. He has a little sister named Sophie, after the daughter you lost, and a baby brother named Thomas. He has a dad who loves him and a granddad who teaches him about business and integrity. And he has a mom who is the strongest, kindest, most incredible person he's ever known. James stood up. You didn't destroy her, Mr. Blackwell. You just proved she was strong enough to survive you. And because she survived, I exist. My siblings exist. The 100 schools she built exist. The thousands of children she's helped exist. Your cruelty didn't win. Her kindness did. Richard was sobbing now, his frail body shaking. Thank you, he managed to say. For what? For letting me know she's happy. For letting me know the baby survived. For giving me... He struggled for words. For giving me peace. James walked to the door, then stopped. I won't tell her I came here, not because I'm protecting you, but because I'm protecting her. She's moved on. She deserves to stay moved on. Richard nodded. You're a good son. I know, James said simply, because I had a good mother. Despite everything you did to her, she became someone who raises children to show mercy even to people who showed her none. James left. The door closed softly behind him. Richard lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 10 years, maybe in his entire life, he felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness. He'd never have that. But knowing that Emma was happy, that James was thriving, that the cruelty he'd inflicted hadn't destroyed the next generation. That was something. 3 weeks later, Richard Blackwell died in his sleep. The hospital called the only contact number he'd listed, his lawyer. There was no funeral announcement, no obituary in major papers, just a small cremation paid for by his estate. But his lawyer had specific instructions. A week after Richard's death, a letter arrived at the Sterling family estate. It was addressed to Emma Sterling. Alexander brought it to her, concerned. It's from Richard Blackwell's lawyer, he said carefully. Emma's face went still. She hadn't heard that name in years. He's dead, Emma, 3 weeks ago, cancer. Emma felt nothing. Not relief, not sadness, nothing. She opened the letter with steady hands and read. The letter was typed, formal, but the words hit Emma like stones. Dear Mrs. Sterling, I am writing to inform you of the passing of Richard Blackwell and to execute the terms of his will. Mr. Blackwell left his entire estate, approximately $30,000, as an anonymous donation to the Sterling Children's Literacy Foundation. He specifically requested that you never be informed of the source. However, he also left this letter, which he wrote in his final days. He asked that I deliver it to you with no obligation to read it. The choice is yours. Sincerely, Robert Chen, Esquire. Attached was a handwritten letter on hospital stationery, the writing shaky but legible. Emma stared at it for a long moment. Alexander stood beside her. You don't have to read it, he said gently. I know. But Emma was curious. Not because she cared about Richard, she didn't, but because after 10 years of complete indifference, she wanted to know if the man who'd destroyed her had learned anything before he died. She unfolded the letter and read. Emma, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect anything from you anymore. I learned that lesson too late, but I learned it. I'm dying. Cancer. I'll be gone by the time you receive this. I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. You don't owe me that. You don't owe me anything. But I need to tell you some things, not because it will change anything, but because they're true. You were right about everything. I was cruel. I was broken. I measured your worth by what you could give me instead of who you were. I called you barren when I was the one who was empty. I mocked your pain when I was the one too cowardly to face my own. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I couldn't stand that you were better than me. For 10 years, I tried to become someone worthy of your forgiveness. I got sober. I went to therapy. I volunteered. I changed. But I finally understand. Being better doesn't erase what I did. It just means I have to live with knowing what I destroyed. 3 weeks ago, someone visited me in the hospital. Your son, James. I don't know how he found me or why he came, but that 16-year-old boy showed me more grace than I ever showed you. He didn't forgive me. He made that very clear. But he told me you were happy, that the baby I mocked was alive and thriving, that you'd built a life of purpose and love, and Emma, hearing that, gave me something I didn't deserve. Peace. I spent 10 years obsessing over you, hoping you'd see my change, hoping I mattered enough for you to hate me or forgive me or feel something. But James made me realize the greatest gift you ever gave me was your indifference. You moved on. You healed. You built a kingdom while I rotted in my regrets. And that's exactly how it should be. I'm leaving what little I have to your foundation, not to earn points, not to buy redemption, but because if my wasted life can help even one child learn to read, then maybe I did one good thing. I hope you never think of me again. I hope my name never crosses your mind. I hope you live 100 years surrounded by people who love you the way I never could. You deserved better than me, Emma. You always did. And I'm sorry it took me dying to finally understand that. Richard. Emma folded the letter slowly. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. Alexander watched her carefully. Are you okay? Emma looked up at him and her eyes were clear. Yes, I am. Do you want to talk about it? No. She smiled softly. He's gone, Alexander. The past is gone, and I don't need to carry it anymore. But then James walked into the room and Emma saw something in her son's face. Guilt, worry, the weight of a secret. Mom, James said quietly, I need to tell you something. Emma's heart sank. She already knew. You visited him. James's eyes widened. How did you? The letter mentioned it. Emma gestured for James to sit. Why didn't you tell me? James sat down heavily, looking at his hands. Because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to think I was betraying you or... James. Emma's voice was gentle. She reached over and took her son's hand. Why did you go? James looked up, and his eyes were filled with tears. I found the video, the one from 10 years ago. I saw what he did to you, what he said, and I was so angry, Mom, so angry. But then I read that he was dying alone, and I needed to understand why someone would hurt you like that. Emma's throat tightened. And did you? Understand? I think so, James said. He was broken, hurt, lost, and he took it out on you because you were the only good thing in his life and he didn't know how to handle that. He wiped his eyes. But Mom, I didn't forgive him. I need you to know that. I told him you were happy, that I was alive, that he didn't destroy you. Emma pulled James into a hug, holding her son tightly. You have such a beautiful heart, she whispered. You showed mercy to someone who showed me none. That takes strength. Are you angry I went? James asked. No, sweetheart. I'm proud. Emma pulled back, looked at her son's face, so much like Alexander's, but with her eyes. You broke a cycle today. You chose kindness when you could have chosen cruelty. That's what makes you different from him. Alexander cleared his throat. Emma, there's something else. Richard's lawyer said there's a small funeral, just cremation. No one is attending. They're asking if anyone wants to. No, Emma said immediately. Then she paused, looked at James, at Alexander. Actually, I think I should go. Both of them stared at her. Are you sure? Alexander asked carefully. Not for him, Emma clarified. For me. I need to close this door completely. I need to stand at his funeral and know that I survived him, that I'm still here, still happy, still whole. And he's gone. The funeral was 3 days later at a small crematorium in South London. Emma wore a simple, black dress. Alexander beside her, James on her other side. They were the only ones there besides the efficient and Richard's lawyer. The service was brief. No eulogy, no mourners, just a plain casket and a stranger reading generic words about life and death and dust returning to dust. Emma stood there, feeling nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not relief, nothing. And that's when she finally understood. She was completely, totally free. After the service, Richard's lawyer approached. "Mrs. Sterling, thank you for coming. Richard would have—" "Please don't," Emma interrupted gently. "He's gone. I came for myself, not for him." The lawyer nodded, understanding. "There's one more thing. Richard left this." He handed Emma a small box. Inside was a ring, her wedding ring from their marriage, the one she'd left behind when she divorced him. And a note. "You left this behind, but you took everything that mattered, your kindness, your strength, your heart. I just wanted you to have this back as proof that you survived me. Crosby." Emma looked at the ring, at this symbol of the worst years of her life, and made a decision. She walked to a nearby trash bin and dropped it in. The ring made a small sound as it hit the bottom. Gone. Erased. Irrelevant. Alexander took her hand. James stood beside her. And Emma Sterling walked out of that crematorium into the bright London sunshine, got into her car, and drove back to her life. Her real life, the one filled with love and purpose, and children who called her mum, and a husband who saw her worth, and a legacy that would outlive every cruel word Richard Blackwell had ever spoken. That evening, Emma sat with her 3 children, James, Sophie, and baby Thomas, reading them stories before bed. Alexander leaned against the doorway, watching, smiling. This was her kingdom, not money, not status. This, love, safety, peace. And as Emma closed the storybook and kissed each of her children good night, she realized something profound. Richard Blackwell had spent 10 years trying to become someone worthy of her forgiveness. But Emma hadn't spent a single day of those 10 years thinking about whether he deserved it. She'd been too busy building a life worth living. 2 weeks later, the Sterling Children's Literacy Foundation announced a major donation from an anonymous donor, $30,000, that would fund scholarships for children from low-income families. Emma approved the acceptance without ever knowing it came from Richard, because in the end, his money could do good even if he never did. The viral video still existed, 47 million views and climbing. People still shared it as an example of instant karma. Richard Blackwell's cruelty was immortalized forever on the internet, but so was Emma's dignity. The image of her standing there pregnant, covered in mud, hands protecting her belly, that image became something else over time. Not a picture of victimhood, but of survival. Women going through divorces would message Emma, "Your story gave me courage to leave." Mothers struggling with infertility would write, "You proved the doctors wrong. You gave me hope." Abuse survivors would reach out, "You showed me that the people who hurt us don't get to define us." Richard's cruelty had tried to destroy Emma, but instead it became the foundation of her greatest strength. And 10 years after muddy water hit her pregnant stomach, Emma Sterling stood as proof that some people don't just survive their worst moments, they transform them into purpose. The Bible says in Romans 8:28, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him." Richard sowed cruelty and reaped loneliness. Emma sowed kindness and reaped a legacy. Vanessa sowed greed and reaped imprisonment. And in the end, the lesson wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about this: the people who hurt us don't get to write our endings. We do. Richard Blackwell died alone, forgotten, unmissed. Emma Sterling lived surrounded by love, purpose, and 3 children who would grow up to be kind because their mother taught them that mercy is stronger than cruelty. And 16-year-old James Sterling learned the most important lesson of all. You can show compassion to people who hurt those you love without betraying the ones they hurt. You can acknowledge someone's humanity without excusing their cruelty. You can break cycles of pain by choosing to be better than those who came before. 20 years from now, when James Sterling is running the family empire and telling his own children about their grandmother Emma, he won't mention Richard Blackwell. Because Richard doesn't deserve space in that story. He'll tell them about the woman who was told she was worthless and became invaluable. The woman who was told she was barren and raised 3 children who changed the world. The woman who was covered in mud and came out golden. That's the story worth telling. That's the legacy worth living. If this story taught you that character matters more than revenge, that kindness triumphs over cruelty, and that the best response to people who hurt us is to live so well they become irrelevant. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and share this with someone who needs to hear that survival isn't just about making it through. It's about building something beautiful on the other side of your pain. Some people spend their lives trying to earn forgiveness they'll never receive. Others spend their lives being so happy that forgiveness becomes irrelevant. Choose to be the second one. God bless you.